All right. Welcome back to Yoga Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Waycott. This week, I want to talk about teaching yoga as a creative outlet and what happens for us as yoga teachers when we start to feel like our creativity is waning a little bit. So in this episode, I'm going to offer some suggestions based off of my personal experience with my own creativity when it comes to teaching as something that does kind of ebb and flow, and how to work with those ebbs and flows of your own creativity so that you can keep teaching and, keep feeling good about what you're putting out there in the world. So, there are a lot of technical aspects to teaching yoga. So things like alignment, anatomy, biomechanics, the structure that we use to create our classes, maybe the frameworks that we follow for sequencing. And there are also many aspects of teaching yoga that are very inherently creative. And for me personally, I have really found over the years that teaching yoga is one of my biggest creative outlets. It is absolutely a way for me to express myself. And I know that a lot of other yoga teachers feel the same and really enjoy that aspect of teaching. And I love the creativity that comes up when it comes to working with different themes, working with music, thinking about the way that I use language. And just like any creative practice, your creativity when it comes to teaching yoga will show up in cycles, right? Like there will be times where you just don't feel as engaged or motivated or inspired is really the word that I'm looking for, as you will at other times. And there are also going to be times when you feel like your inspiration is really just flowing and you're filled with ideas that you need to execute and direct. But I've absolutely found that, there are plenty of times where I don't have anything particularly profound to say when I'm teaching. And maybe I don't feel inspired when it comes to sequencing or creating new classes all the time. And I really want to start by acknowledging that that is so natural. And we don't always need to be on the hamster wheel of feeling like we constantly need to be coming up with, something new all the time. Or that, every single class needs to be groundbreaking, or that we need to reinvent the way that we teach every single week. We can also learn to honor those quieter phases where we just don't have the same inspiration and creativity that we do at other times. And, even when you may be feeling a little bit uninspired as a yoga teacher, I think that those classes can still be really powerful. They can still give your students that consistency and that steadiness that they need. And even if you don't feel like you're in the most creative phase at this particular moment, it doesn't mean that your class wasn't really meaningful for your students. So just start by remembering that your perception of your own creativity, this is a really big one, doesn't always match the impact that you're actually having on your students. So you might think, oh, that kind of sucked. I've taught that class before. It's nothing new. It's not interesting. But it could have been super meaningful and super impactful for your students. So just start there. Today, I want to talk a little bit about some ways that you can get out of a creative rut if you are experiencing one. But again, I think before we get into that, just really go back to acknowledging that creativity has its natural ebbs and flows. And you are not always going to be on. You're not always going to be coming up with new ideas. And sometimes feeling like you are in a little bit of a rut can be a sign to slow down. And it's good to know that, typically these kind of creative ruts are very temporary and they do pass, and that creative energy comes back eventually. But I find that these phases where I don't have as much inspiration show up after I've been in a really intense phase of what I call like creation and execution. So, for example, I will get an idea for a workshop or a training or like something that I want to run, and I will get this huge burst of inspiration and creativity that kind of like, I don't know, swells up inside of me. And I feel like I have to act on it because I'm so inspired. So I'll go through that process of bringing my creative vision to fruition and getting all those tangible pieces in place to actually like run the workshop or run the training. And, maybe I need to create a manual, or I need to create like digital assets so that I can market my offering on social media. So I use that energy to create all those things. Then I run the training, I run the retreat, I execute it. And afterwards, I do find that I experience like a lull where once I've gone through all that work, I just don't have like as much to give for a little period of time. And I know that we all work in such different ways. We all have totally different energy. But just in my own experience, that has really helped me be kinder to myself by like observing and acknowledging the way that my creative energy works. Now I know, like, if I do a big project or I put something big out into the world, that I'm probably not going to feel as creative for a short amount of time after that big project is finished and has been executed. And that's okay. But I just really want to say that like I don't have constant creativity. It absolutely comes in waves. And in the yogic tradition, those phases are represented by the idea that everything is constantly changing and everything is constantly moving. And we're always moving through these phases like of the universe of creation and preservation and dissolution. So there's also going to be times where life gets really, really busy and you have a lot on your plate, like personally, professionally, in your family life. Maybe you're working other jobs, and it's just not a reality that you can dedicate as much time to your studentship or like class preparation or just feeling like totally inspired all the time. And I don't think that that is something to feel bad about. I think that the longer you teach, the more you'll realize that these kind of small phases where you're just a bit disconnected or maybe even a little bit like disenchanted are very natural. They're usually temporary, and like everything comes back around and your creativity will come back around too. So one thing that's helpful is if you recognize that you are in a place of really high creativity and maybe, those phases don't show up that often for you, I would write down or like at least make a mental note of what you are exploring, like what excites you, what kind of ideas and themes are kind of pouring out from you in that particular time. And then when you are in one of those quieter seasons where you just don't feel as inspired, maybe you can revisit some of those notes and, just remind yourself that like your creativity will return. So with this being said, another piece of advice that I have is to put some supports in place for yourself for when that inevitable lack of creativity shows up. So prepare ahead of time, because if there is one thing that I know from teaching yoga for a really long time, it's that life happens and there are just going to be times when like it's not reasonable for you to always come up with something new. And so one of the ways that I have supported myself in this is by creating what I call essentially a bank of sequences. And I want to say about 5 years ago, I decided to bind a physical book for myself of some of my tried and tested sequences that I had taught many, many times. So I was familiar with the sequences. I had refined them. I knew that they worked. I knew that they made sense. And I took that collection of sequences, it was probably about 12 of them, and I organized them into a book. And it was like, I basically like published a book, but it was just for myself. And I had all my sequences organized by like the type of class that they would be suitable for, maybe like a peak pose that it worked towards or a theme that it worked towards. And like, obviously we all have our own methods of organization. So do it in a way that makes sense for your brain. But I did that. I created this book of sequences that I really liked. And in that particular year, it was actually kind of like an experiment where I just taught the same sequences over and over for like a whole year. And that should actually be another podcast episode. But what I want to kind of share and come back to is that if you can find a way to organize your sequences in a way that makes sense to you and put them somewhere where you have access to them in a pinch, you are probably going to be so thankful and save yourself a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety if you just have something to fall back on those harder days. Because as a longtime yoga teacher, I can't count the amount of times that I've had a crazy day where something unexpected happened, or back when I still taught in studios, I would get called in to sub a class, and sometimes it was really last minute, like there wasn't enough notice to even plan anything. And it was so incredibly helpful for me to be able to just pull out a sequence that I knew made sense. I knew it was going to work. You can always kind of make little tweaks on the spot, but that really does fill the gaps during those times when your creativity just isn't flowing. If you're going to do this, like start small. You can keep a Google Doc, you can keep a notes app, you can like make voice memos for yourself. You can label your sequences however you want, like find your own system that works for you. But I would start building that for yourself as soon as you can, especially if you teach yoga full time, because I think it's more likely that you're going to encounter this if you are a full-time yoga teacher. But honestly, for all yoga teachers, like just have something that you can fall back on. And that way you're always going to show up prepared to class. You're always going to be ready and feeling professional and just like, yeah, you've got something to teach and you're not panicking or scrambling at the last minute. So prepare ahead of time for those inevitable dips in creativity. My next suggestion, and again, this is something that I do personally, is to return to your roots. So I want to invite you to think back to what it was about teaching yoga that really inspired you when you first started. And my guess is that you probably have some old training manuals and textbooks just like sitting around. And I would be curious if there's anything in those kind of older books of yours that speaks to you today. It's funny because I originally trained in Anusara yoga, and it is a modern lineage that is derived from Iyengar yoga. And sometimes I find myself going back to the universal principles of alignment and those fundamental teachings that really informed the way that I learned to teach yoga. And maybe that is kind of like my call to action for you, is to go back, dust off some of your old training manuals, maybe like flip through some of the notes that you wrote during your first yoga teacher trainings, if you still have those, and reconnect to like what it was that initially drew you to this path of teaching, or what it was that informed the way that you teach now, right? Like, what is the foundation of your understanding of yoga? And can you go back to that from time to time, almost like going back to basics in a way, rather than feeling like you need to come up with something completely new? And most likely, what's so cool is that as our personal relationship with yoga evolves over time, our understanding of those foundational teachings also evolves along with it. So things that may not have felt meaningful to you right in the beginning when you first started teaching might actually hold more meaning now, or there might be like a new understanding that you can associate to those things now that you've been teaching for a while. And that's one of the really, really cool parts about teaching yoga. So that is another invitation that I have for you if you are feeling like, like your creativity is waning. Can you try pulling out an older principle or older teaching, like from when you first started? And, a lot of times those foundational ideas are going to land really, really deeply with your students. Now, the next suggestion I think is super obvious, but be a student again. So take a training, explore a different style of yoga. Maybe you just go attend somebody else's class to reset your own perspective. Teaching and practicing are not the same thing, but your studentship and your personal relationship with yoga will absolutely inform the way that you teach. And everybody has a different capacity, like in terms of their studentship. We are all going through, different phases and different seasons of our life. People have different circumstances, people have different needs, but I would consider like, what would be enjoyable for you as a student of yoga? And are you taking the time to nurture like that student part of you? Because sometimes when we get into teaching yoga, especially if you are just like out there hustling and doing your time and like putting in the hours teaching, which is so amazing, you can find yourself with like tons of classes on your plate. You can find yourself teaching a lot. And that tends to be the place where sometimes your personal relationship with like practicing yoga kind of goes onto the back burner. And that also tends to be the time when we start losing creativity and maybe even setting ourselves up for burnout in the future. So I would really ask yourself that, like, what do I need as a student? How can I feed like that student part of me, so that I can stay inspired? And, it could even be as simple as like just setting aside some free time for yourself to roll around on your mat at home. It doesn't even have to be directed. You might just like explore different ways of moving. You might even explore modalities that are outside of yoga, but give yourself some time to be in your own body, be in your own experience, and fill your own cup. Because especially when you are in what we call like a giving profession, and I do consider yoga to be a giving profession where we are holding space for a lot of people, we are giving our time and our energy for to people, like, it's so easy to quickly become depleted physically, energetically, and depleted from like that creative well inside of us. So again, do your best to be a student, check in with yourself from time to time, and follow what feels genuinely exciting for you as a student, because that energy will translate directly into your teaching. Like if there's something that you're really excited about, really stoked on, that you just remembered or that you just learned, like it is absolutely going to come across in your class, and your students are going to notice and they're going to feel it. And, this brings me into kind of something similar, but it's find inspiration from time to time outside of yoga. So again, think about what interests you, what lights you up. Is it listening to a podcast? Is it reading philosophy, reading books, reading poetry, watching films, cooking? Like, you name it, there is inevitably going to be some creative, like, cross-pollination. And I would really urge you to not get too stuck in like only surrounding yourself with yoga and only making friends with yoga people. Like, expand your horizons, because there is a lot of inspiration waiting there for you in the rest of the world. One of my favorite things to do is, and I don't even know if I'm doing this consciously, but it's to use music as a spark for my inspiration. I'm a really big music appreciator. I love to listen to music, and sometimes I will hear a song. I'll think to myself, like, this is really cool. This song sounds really good. I would love to listen to this while I'm practicing yoga or play this during a yoga class. And I start to basically create a playlist, and I start to think about, well, what other songs would sound really good with this one? And, once I start to form a playlist, I look at it and I consider, like, what is the vibe or the feeling that I get from this music playlist that I've created? And then what kind of yoga class would represent that feeling or that vibe? And I hope that this makes sense, but it's kind of like a backwards way of building a yoga class. So my guess, I actually don't know how most people go about their class planning, but my guess is that most people start with like a sequence that they want to create, and then maybe build a playlist, like a music playlist afterwards. But I do often find myself being so inspired by music that I build a playlist first, kind of feel into like the vibe of that playlist, and then create a class that I feel matches the playlist that I've created. So it's kind of like backwards class planning. And, again, it's a great, fun way that like speaks to me to feel a little bit more creative. Another thing that you can do is observe your students more closely. So sometimes when we are in a rut with our creativity, it's because we're being too focused on our own ideas, or we're almost like forcing ourselves to try to come up with something new. But if you can kind of shift the lens and look outwards, I would ask yourself, what are my students showing me? What are their needs? Like, just from my outside perspective, what kind of energy are they showing up with? And all of that feedback that you get through observation can really start to spark new directions for your class themes and for your sequencing. So get into the habit of looking around the room, noticing body language, notice conversations that people are having. I would make note of questions that your students are asking you. So like, what are they curious about? Where are like the gaps, if you will, in their knowledge or their understanding? And then how could you take that information in order to serve them even better? Because I think this alone can unlock a lot of inspiration that maybe you didn't know you had. Your creativity is not something that needs to be forced. It's something that is a natural part of you. But when we are depleted, when we have a lot going on in our lives, like, it is naturally going to come and go. And we do need to honor and trust kind of like the natural waves of our creativity, and just know that your best ideas will return eventually. But definitely honor, those quieter seasons as they come, as well as the more expansive ones where you do feel like you have a lot of creativity and inspiration flowing through you. All right. So again, another short and sweet episode for you today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for taking the time to tune in to Yoga Insider Podcast. Make sure that you rate and review the podcast wherever you're tuning in from, so that more yoga teachers around the world can connect. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next time.